Welcome to the Ultraswimming podcast. This is episode 2. I'm your co-host, Evan Morrison.
And I'm your co-host, Jessica Kieras.
So today we're going to talk about a big topic in ultraswimming, and that's self-organized swims. In the 10,000-foot view of ultraswimming, there's two general ways to approach doing long swims. Sanctioned swims and self-organized swim. So Jess, what's a sanctioned swim?
Yeah, so a sanctioned swim is like most of our really famous popular routes. So the English Channel, Catalina, 20 Bridges, these swims have gotten so popular that they have an organization. Sometimes the organizations have been around for a really long time, and the organization does all kinds of things for you. They maintain a list of boats, they offer observers, they document the swim, and they have their own established list of records and results and things like that. Evan, do you want to tell people what a self-organized swim is in comparison?
Yeah, so if you want to do a swim in a body of water that doesn't have a local organization, or you want to do a different route in a body of water that no one's ever done before, you really have only one option, and that's to arrange it yourself. There's no organization to help you with it, so you've got to do it yourself. And if you think about it, this is actually most bodies of water in the world. There's really only a handful of these local solo swimming organizations. So if you get beyond the most popular swims like the English Channel and 20 Bridges, you're really on your own, and that's kind of exciting. Jess, you have a lot of experience with these self-organized swims. Why are people drawn to this, and what are the pros and cons of organizing yourself?
I think people are really excited about doing these because, you can do them in your local lake. You can save money sometimes. You can do it with a kayak escort only. You can design a route that's never been done before. You can do it on your own timeline. You're like, oh, wow, the weather looks great. We've had a bunch of people actually submit documentation where part of the process was they were hanging out waiting for there to be good weather. And when there was, they called their local boat rental company and got together a few friends and went out and did the swim during a time that was really ideal. There is a lot, there are a lot of advantages. There's some parts of it that are a little bit more challenging, like you have to do a lot of the logistical work yourself, and we can get into some of those things, but that's what's drawn me into these swims. I think it's what draws a lot of people to them.
Yeah. So Jess and I are in an interesting position to talk about this subject, not only because we've both done self-organized swims. Jess in particular has done 4 of them, and 2 of them were even more than 24 hours in duration. So really substantial efforts in planning and swimming. But Jess and I are also both involved in processing the documentation of self-organized swims that are submitted to MSF for ratification. So since 2014, we've ratified almost 450 self-organized swims, and there's another 40 or so that are pending for this year. So I'm pretty sure there's no one in the world who's looked at more sets of this documentation than the 2 of us have.
And we love it.
Yeah,
it's really fun.
We get to learn about all these different places and people just doing fabulous routes. I mean, it's just as much a kind of like a vicarious travel experience and a geography lesson all in one. So I've also been involved in planning and observing and documenting another number of other people's swims too. Everything from 7 round-trip Angel Island swims when I lived in San Francisco to Sarah Thomas's 104-mile swim in Lake Champlain, which is still the longest unassisted swim ever. I was the observer and the documenter on that. Jess will bring in examples today from 2 of the major swims she's done and organized herself. So I think we both bring some intriguing experiences to this topic.
Yeah, and might I add, you're humble, but you actually invented the solo documentation swim template. And that's our template that, it's got GPS data, photos, videos, and narrative, and we'll talk about those components and like how people put those together for submission. But I just kind of want to point out to any of our listeners who don't know that Evan actually developed these things originally, and it's become an international standard for ratifying solo swims. Other organizations have kind of picked it up and copied it and use it now. Partly, I think, or maybe mostly because it's just a really well-designed template, and it includes the things that you need to know when you're reviewing a swim that helps you kind of determine what happened out there. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. Okay, so the first step in doing any self-organized swim is to get some inspiration as to where you're going to swim and why you want to swim. So this happens in all kinds of different ways. Some people have stories where they grew up visiting a lake and they have, every summer they vacation there with their family. And then, they're like, you know what? I'd really like to swim the length of this lake. And they start thinking about where would it make sense to start? Where would it make sense to end?
Yeah, I think there's something so magical about standing on the shore of a new body of water and kind of looking across and thinking, I could swim that. I wonder what that would be like. I wonder what this is like to swim in. And I think there's this popular subreddit called "What's It Like Living There?"
Oh,
And so
nice.
people will put like a picture of a map and crowdsource the question to Reddit, like what's it for people who know this place? What's it like? And so to me, that's kind of like what coming up with swim ideas is like. You find a body of water, like what's it like to swim there? What's it like to feel that, to be immersed in that water, and swim across it?
Yeah, have you ever done that on the airplane? You're flying along and you
Yeah.
look down and there's a huge lake and you're like, whoa, which lake is that? And has it been swum? Where have people swum before? Yeah, that's amazing.
One of my favorite ways to waste time on the internet is actually to just kind of fool around on Google Maps and scroll around and look for the patches of blue and zoom in on it. And I'm going to do an example that actually was kind of interesting.
Oh, cool.
So I'm going to try to share my screen here. Let's see if I can do it.
While Evan's doing that, I'll mention anyone listening, the audio version, we also have a YouTube version. So if you do the YouTube version, you can see what Evan's screen looks like.
I was looking around in Canada. Obviously, Quebec and Canada have thousands and thousands of lakes. We were talking in the last episode about Minnesota being the land of 10,000 lakes. I think parts of Canada must be even more than that. But I was zooming in on this kind of part of northern Quebec, and I came in on this. I was like, what is that? Like, what kind of, that's like a lake, but it has an island in the middle. And then there's like a lake in the island. And then there's an island in the lake, which is in the island, which is in a lake.
I've totally seen this on Google Earth before. Yeah.
And so this is called, it turns out, the Eye of Quebec. And it's just a really interesting feature here. It's like a circular lake that has a big island in it. And this is massive here. Like you can see this really far zoomed out. And if you zoom in, take a quick distance here down to here, this is 33 miles right here, the diameter of the island approximately. And there's a reason that it looks like this. And it turns out that this is the site of an ancient meteor crash. And I guess what happens when there's a meteor this big and it creates this indentation in the earth, and then this land pops up. And so I was zooming in, I was like, wow, that's a really interesting feature. And then, the second thought is, gosh, I think you could swim here. I wonder what that's like. And it would be a pretty substantial swim. I think I measured it one time. If you go all the way around this circular lake, it's got to be like 150 miles close.
It's super far, yeah.
So, you could do it as potentially as a relay, though. I mean, this is a doable relay. It looks like my quick measurement's about 112 miles, 180K. You could do this as a relay. And this led to more Google searching, and it turns out they do kayak expeditions in this lake. Take a week, drive up here to northern Quebec in the summer, obviously, and they do kayak expeditions around here, fishing during the day and camping at night. It just sounds so fantastic. So any place you can kayak, obviously, you can swim. So anyway, this is kind of one example of how you can get inspired to do swims. Um,
You
what
guys,
about?
I gotta say, I gotta say to everybody listening, this is what's so funny about marathon swimmers is, like, Evan and I have not actually talked about this. I have Quebec, and I totally have done almost exactly the same process. Like, I measured the route. I was like, wow, that's really far. Um, I think I looked up the water temperature, but I do not remember what it is. It sounded cold. That's all I remember. I was like, oh, that's too cold for me. But did not think of doing a relay. So that's a really good idea. But I just think it's really funny that we have the same process. Like,
Yeah.
what is that? Oh, wow. Let me Google it. Let me measure it. So this is what happens to you when you venture down the path of self-organized swims, is you
Hmm.
start doing these things.
Well, I mean, the world is mostly water. So there's still places like, no matter how many little Google Map rabbit holes that you go down, there's still places that you haven't even looked at, much less visited in person. So I think this is a project that could take many lifetimes.
Absolutely. Yep.
After you're inspired to do a route and kind of you have that first little seed of inspiration, um, the second step, which is a little more technical, is like, how do you design and specify the exact route that you're going to do? And sort of within this broad category of self-organized swims, there's two kind of subcategories. The one is an established route, and that's something, a route that's been done before. It's still a self-organized swim because there's no organization, but somebody's done a particular route. And the second subcategory that Jess has much more experience than I do with, and that's the pioneer route. But you've done both types of swims, right, Jess?
Yeah, sort of. So all my established route swims have been through organizations. Whereas the pioneer swims have been, I haven't done any established swims through like MSF documentation.
Yeah.
Um, Although I will just have a quick shout out to our friends at the Santa Barbara Channel Swimming Association, because they're, I try to think of another organization out there that lets you do this, but they let me do a pioneer route through the association where I swam from Oxnard around uh, Anacapa and then back to Oxnard. So no one had done that exact route before, although Ken Vignosa had done a really similar route, also a pioneering route through the SBCSA. So sorry, little tangent there, but it was cool that the association let me do a pioneer route through them.
Yeah. So, and actually, I love that route that you did out and around
Well, you actually
An-
designed the route. So.
Anacapa. um,
For people that don't know, Evan was like, you could do a loop around Anacapa and swim back. And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. I think I'll try to do that.
so so the loop route is actually my favorite kind of marathon swim route. The the one self-organized swim that I've done, that I actually did it twice, is the round trip Angel Island. That's where you start. You start at Aquatic Park in San Francisco. You swim out past Alcatraz, all the way around Angel Island, and then back to the starting point. We call that a loop route, and it's just to me, it's the best kind of route because it combines a channel swim, which is sort of the canonical marathon swim like the English Channel, with a circumnavigation, where for the middle part of the swim, you're actually right next to an island. You're going around. There's lots of interesting things to look at. And so I look for loop routes out there wherever I can find them. Angel Island is a great one. But Anacapa is only 12 miles offshore. And when you're as good at extremely long distances as Jessica is, she's someone who can do that. Swim out to Anacapa, swim around it, swim back.
Okay, so the other type of swim, the pioneer route, that's where you get really imaginative and think a lot about where does it make sense to swim and how do you want to set up your route. Do you want your route to be one that sort of starts a trend and people want to come back and do it? No matter what type of route you have, if you want it to be an official route, that's recognized in the LongSwims database and gets a ratification, not just like a fun adventure training swim, then the route really needs to be what we call repeatable. And so this is another thing that I think Evan's contributed to the swimming world, is talking about, Evan, you wrote an article about this like a long time ago, and I read it before I even had ever talked to you, but the blog post was about repeatable routes. And I thought that it did a really good job of describing why it's important to have a route that's repeatable if it's going to be an official route. So maybe you could speak a little bit to that.
So when we talk about repeatable routes, what we mean is that when you do a swim on a given day, that someone else can attempt the same swim, and at least in terms of its official recognition, it's the same distance. Now, you may not swim straight. Your boat may decide to not take the straightest possible line due to currents or something, but the route actually stays the same regardless of what of any navigational decisions that you might make. And so the only way really to compare marathon swims across time is if they have the same distance. So on any given day, if you swim the English Channel, it's always going to be 21 miles, regardless of how far up and down the channel the currents take you, and regardless of where you land in France. You don't get extra credit for landing, in Calais. It's always a 21-mile swim. And so a repeatable route is actually is the minimum route. It's the shortest path that you can possibly take to get from point A to point B on a one-way swim. Or if you're doing a circumnavigation of an island, it's the shortest possible line that you can draw around the island from point to point. Even if you swim further offshore from the island, the distance that you get credit for is only the shortest one. So one of the examples in the blog post that you referred to earlier, I'm going to share my screen here, is...
And I'll go ahead and put this post in the show notes as well. So if anyone's curious, you can go read the post for yourself.
Okay, so here we have Flathead Lake in Montana. Now, the kind of canonical established route across the length of Flathead, which was established by Craig Lenning and Sarah Thomas back in 2015, I want to say, is from Summers to Polson. So let's start here and draw the start point in Summers and draw the finish point in Polson. Now, what you notice here is that the line crosses land. So you get about 26.4 miles if you just draw a straight line from the start to finish. So that's not the route, because we can only include the swimmable part of this. If it's repeatable, it has to be swimmable. So what we do here is we gradually adjust the route so that the line only covers water. So now we have a line that fully stays in the water. It's a repeatable and swimmable minimum route across the lake. Now, one way to understand repeatability is what makes a route unrepeatable. And you can imagine if you didn't know about this kind of standard in marathon swimming, you could say, oh, well, I want to make this a longer swim. I want to draw my line over here. And you notice you can add a couple miles to the swim if you just kind of mosey on over to the other side of Flathead Lake and then kind of swim in here. The problem with that is that it's not repeatable. So where I've drawn the point here, how do you know that you have fulfilled this waypoint here? Some people might go really close to this point of land here. Other people might go couple hundred meters off. Other people, you can see how you can kind of cheat this waypoint. You can shortcut it. And if you think about observing a swim, it's almost impossible to know that you're fulfilling a waypoint like this. So this route is unrepeatable. This kind of longer route across Flathead Lake cannot be repeated on a different day. Other people might choose to make their turn 20 meters, 100 meters, 150 meters. It's a different swim every time. So the only way to make it the same swim in terms of distance is to create a repeatable minimum route. And that's what this line is basically here. So no matter where you swim in Flathead Lake, from Summers to Polson, this is the route that you get credit for.
Yeah, someone might ask, like, well, why is it important for a route to be repeatable? And the reason why, I mean, because like I said before, going wherever you want in a lake is a great way to have an adventure and a great way to do training. But the reason for having repeatable routes, at least in my mind, for official ratified, official swims, I guess, is that you're trying to tie what you're doing to what everyone else is doing. You're trying to be a part of something. So if you want to do your adventure swim or training swim just for your own personal reasons, like, that's cool. Like, I do that all the time. And so does everyone else I know. But if you're trying to tie what you're doing to what everyone else is doing in the sport or the community, then it's really important that you do it in a way that connects you to what other people might do in the future or what other people have done in the past. And so, like I've been saying, if you do your turnaround point sort of like you're like, okay, that's close enough to that point, I'm just going to turn around here, then you might have turned around sooner than the other person who did it. Or the next person might turn around further or sooner, and then you're not really connected with them anymore. So in my mind, this is a really important factor in something bigger than yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about trying to maintain historical records in the sport, the only way to do that is if there's this concept of a repeatable route, that for a given swim across the English Channel or from Summers to Polson in Flathead Lake, that the distance is always the same. That way you can say who's the fastest. If every swim had a different distance, you can't say who's the fastest. The record keeping becomes impossible without repeatable routes. So that's the motivation there.
Why don't we just use GPS? I mean, that's a question that a lot of people sometimes come to us with, is why can't I just go with my GPS watch distance or GPS boat distance, or like, why are these waypoints better to use?
Well, what you'll notice when you wear a GPS watch, if you do the same training swim over and over and over again, the distance that the GPS records is different every time. It tends to be. And that's because you don't swim in exactly the same place in the water every time. And additionally, GPS is not perfect, especially if you're wearing it on your arm and it goes underwater every stroke. There can be, and even on the best GPS transponders, there can be an error of a few meters. And when you're adding that up over the course of several hours, the distance that a GPS tracker is measuring is going to be different every time. It also depends on how often the GPS is getting your location. If you look at the same exact GPS track, but you have waypoints, you have your location recorded every 5 minutes versus every 10 minutes versus every 10 seconds. For each of those versions of the track, the distance is different. So there's no way to really compare the distance. You're doing the same route, but it's a different distance every time.
Yeah. But I mean, that totally makes sense.
So a key concept in understanding route repeatability is this concept of waypoint enforcement. And what that means is that the geography of a body of water enforces a minimum distance from your start point to your finish point. So here we have Flathead Lake again, and you see the enforced route, the white line here, which kind of is hugging this points of land on the west coast of the lake. And here we see in the red dotted line an unenforced route, which adds a bunch of distance. So in each of these cases, this waypoint here is enforcing a minimum distance. You cannot cut this line short without going onto the land. So the technical definition of a repeatable route is a route in which all of the waypoints are enforced. So here's the zoom in. Here we have an enforced waypoint and we have an unenforced waypoint. And what you'll notice is that the angle that the route line forms with the land here is less than 180 degrees for an enforced waypoint. If, on the other hand, the angle that the route line makes with the land is more than 180 degrees, like this, it kind of gives the impression of bouncing off of the land, ping-ponging. That's an unenforced waypoint. So uh, if the technical definition of repeatable route is that all the waypoints are enforced, the technical definition of an enforced waypoint is that it forms an angle with the land of less than 180 degrees. And here we have an example of an unenforced route. Jess, what do you make of this route?
The waypoints are not enforced. So it looks like the swimmer was, swimming along and then made various different turns in the lake, but we don't know exactly where those turns are based on geographical features of the lake. And so unfortunately, like if I were like, hey, I really want to do the same route, I would not be able to do that because I wouldn't know where to turn around in the lake. And I wouldn't be able to do it by GPS point either, even if the swimmer was like, hey, I turned around at this GPS point, because my GPS transmitter might have a different place for that number than where this swimmer was swimming. So it'd be hard to repeat, or I mean, it would be actually impossible to repeat the way that the swimmer did it.
Yeah. So exactly. Almost all of these waypoints, and these are the blue markers here, are what this swimmer has designated as the waypoints. Almost all of these are unenforced. You could swim a little bit further offshore, and it would be a different waypoint. Every attempt of this swim would be a different distance. And that's just, it's a colorful example of an unenforced route. And so stepping back a bit, what's happening with this route is that the swimmer is trying to impose a distance. So they wanted to set a record. This would have been a record at the time, 105 kilometers. They wanted to do a 105-kilometer swim in this lake, which is only about 35 kilometers across. And so the only way to swim 105 miles in a lake this size is to just kind of go around and around and around until you get there.
Or you could swim back and forth and do a multi-segment route.
Right. So one way to enforce, if you wanted to swim from this end of the lake to the other end of the lake and do an enforced route, if you cleared the water at this end, and then you came back and you cleared the water at this end, and then you just repeated that, then you could get to 105. However, the record this person was seeking was a continuous, a nonstop swim. And so a multi-segment swim would involve you can get out of the water for 10 minutes at each end. So basically, I would say that unless you're counting a multi-way swim where you're clearing the water at each end, you cannot do a 105-kilometer continuous swim in this lake. You're trying to impose a route on a lake that it's not aligned with the body of water. And so this is kind of getting into the second aspect. So we talked about the technical aspects of repeatable routes, or the technical aspects of a route design. But the second big aspect is kind of aesthetic considerations. And in general, I would say that you want your route to be aligned with the body of water. You want it to make sense given the geography of the lake. So what are some examples from your experience, Jess?
So one of my first documented swims, I think is my second actually, was this route in a local lake for me. It's a couple hours away from where I live. It has some of the clearest water in the entire world. It is called Waldo Lake, and it's around 5,000 plus feet elevation. And you
beautiful
can
place.
Evan has been there.
Yeah, we did a great swim there.
Yeah, it's a really, really special place. If you're ever in Oregon, please do yourself a favor and go for a swim there. Contact me if you want, especially if you want to repeat the route I'm about to describe. So this is one of my favorite places to go and spend the day training. And so I had actually already done this route a few times, but I really wanted it to be an official route in the Long Swims database that other people would find out about and be able to repeat because it's so beautiful. And so I set to work thinking about what would make sense for a route. And so I'm going to do a screen share here, but So for people listening, I'm just sharing a picture of Waldo Lake on Google Earth. And if you, whenever you get done driving or running or whatever you're doing right now, listening to the podcast, pull up a picture of Waldo Lake and just look on Google Earth so you can kind of see what it's like. But basically, there are 3 islands in this lake. They're very tiny islands. So we've got one on the north end of the lake, one on the south end of the lake, and then there's a third one that is on the west side of the lake, Rhododendron Island, which, by the way, is called Rhododendron Island because there's tons of rhododendrons on it and they all bloom in June. And right when the road opens, if you drive up there, you can swim over to the island and see the rhododendrons blooming, and they are amazing.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's like one of my favorite things ever. But there's also a parking lot here at the Shadow Bay day use area. You can park there. You start there. You come out of the bay, and like Evan was saying, I wanted my route to be enforced by geographical waypoints in the lake. So I picked these islands. And you swim up to the North Island. You swim around this tiny little island. And if you're looking at the picture of the lake, you can see there's all this other water over here. And obviously, hello, I'm a swimmer. I want to swim everywhere. I want to swim all in the water. But there's not an island over there. There's not a boat ramp. It's actually all wilderness. There's no road access there. So there's not really like a good waypoint at that end of the lake. So to make the route fit the lake, I swam back down to the island on the west side, Rhododendron Island. I looped around that, and then I swam down to the southern island, looped around that, and then ended over in Shadow Bay where I started. So it was kind of like not really a perimeter swim, but it covered a lot of ground in the lake, but still had these islands that I swam around that there would be no way to do a shorter version of the route and still swim around the islands.
Yeah, so this is such a great example because when we're talking about repeatable routes and waypoint enforcement, these aren't really, maybe the term we're using is different or original, but we're using concepts that as swimmers we already know this concept, and that's because when you do a swim around a buoy course, the organizer is setting up buoys. Now, for a solo swim, we wouldn't consider these to be enforced routes because the buoys are not permanent. But that's essentially what the organizer is doing in a race, that's setting up a buoy course. They're trying to enforce on a given day a distance that the swimmers are doing. And so what Jess has done here in Waldo Lake is she's used the natural geography of the lake, these islands, as buoys. They're buoys that nature has provided, and so this is one of the great things about all the documented swim submissions we see is there's a number of these very creative little solutions to doing a route in a closed body of water. If there's islands, then you have your buoys there. And they're permanent, which makes it repeatable. So yeah, I always love when swimmers find these solutions that are achieving something they want, which is getting a swim of a certain distance and seeing different parts of the lake or whatever, but you're also making it repeatable. So I love it.
Not to mention these islands are absolutely beautiful. I mean, they are gorgeous to look at. The water is not too deep there, so you kind of need to do some breaststroking and sculling to get around, but they're so pretty. So it's like, why would you not want to go swim over to these islands? Yeah, so there's my pitch for Waldo Lake, but also for using islands as enforcers of the route. Just like, that's a perfect example with the buoys.
So another aesthetic consideration in designing these routes is figuring out your start and finish locations. So I'm gonna go back to Google Maps here, and I'm going to share my screen. Like, Tahoe has had marathon swimmers drawn to it for generations. I believe the earliest documented marathon swim I'm aware of was back in the, I want to say the 20s, 1920, Myrtle Huddlestone did a swim across the width. But the point I want to make here is that in a lake like this, there's literally an infinite number of lines across the lake, repeatable lines. The Trans-Tahoe relay kind of goes from here to here, Sand Harbor over to a little beyond Dollar Point. So that's a repeatable route. But I could move this point down here. This is also a repeatable route. Move a little further and I'll move this one up here, let's say. That's a repeatable route, point A to point B. There's an infinite number of lines across Lake Tahoe. So how do you choose one? And maybe these routes are established now. There's the length between Incline Village and Camp Richardson. That's the standard length route. That's right over here, actually. There's the Tom Linthicum invented the Viking swim that goes from Cave Rock, Nevada, over to Emerald Bay. That's a standard route. There's a number of routes across the width of the lake. So this is kind of the standard width route, Homewood to Glenbrook. How did these routes arise, given that there's an infinite number of potential lines that you could do across Lake Tahoe? What do you think, Jess?
I don't know. I was actually like, oh my gosh, he's going to tell me something I've been wanting to ask him for a really long time. Like, how do you pick? How did these arise? I'm going to venture a guess though. So I think it's just human nature to try to find points that make the most sense. So if you're trying to do, the middle of the lake, then you might pick points that are the furthest, sort of the middle of the lake and the furthest points. If you don't, like, let's say you do something different than that, then somebody else might come along and do it in a way that makes sense. And then a third person will come along and they're going to pick either your route the way you did it, or they're going to pick the other person's route. And so in a sense, choosing your starting and end points is kind of dare I say, competitive, because you're vying for the support of future swimmers. If you make a really elegant, beautiful route that has logistical advantages or features, then other people are going to be like, I want to do that one instead of doing one that someone else did. And then in the end, the one that everybody does is the one that's going to be the standard route. That's my guess, but I've been wanting to ask you about this for a long time. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I picked Lake Tahoe for a reason, and that's that the development of routes in Lake Tahoe demonstrates what you're saying. The first lengthwise route across Lake Tahoe, I'm going to pull up Longswim's database, just so I get this fact right. Okay, Fred Rogers in 1955 swam from Kings Beach to El Dorado Beach in South Lake Tahoe. So this was the first lengthwise swim of Lake Tahoe, 1955. Basically from South Lake Tahoe up to Kings Beach. So what you'll notice, this is about 32.8 kilometers. I mean, this is mostly a length of Lake Tahoe, but what you'll notice is that you can make it longer. If you move this point over to Incline, you've made it longer. And if you move this point over to Camp Richardson, you see how this part of the lake goes a little further south than South Lake Tahoe. Now you've made it more like a 34 and a half kilometer route. So between 1955 and when this Camp Richardson to Incline Village route was first done by Laura Collette in 2004, I believe, there was a gradual progression from this line from the southeast to the northwest to this line, which is from the southwest to the northeast. And this is the route that is now standard. It's the longest possible route across Lake Tahoe. So the technical term that we use for that is exhaustive traversal. So it's an exhaustive traversal of the lake. And until you get to that point, if you do a shorter route, over time, people are going to want to do a longer route. Because I can do a real length of Lake Tahoe. All the ones before were not real lengths. Now that's not how we treat it in the database. All of these lengths from 1955 on are considered full lengths, but the standard route now is from Camp Richardson to Incline Village. So after you've come up with your dream and you've designed a repeatable route, the next step is planning. You got to plan the logistics of the swim, the day that you're going to do it, who's going to be around you, and this, I think, is complicated and comes with experience. And experience is something that my co-host has a lot of experience with this. So, what are the basic steps in planning a self-organized swim after you've figured out which route you're doing?
I would say first thing is I got to make sure that I can get a boat. Because with the exception, the Waldo swim was just super briefly for people who are maybe on a tight budget, don't want to hire a boat. It's actually totally possible to do a swim with just kayaks. So Waldo Lake is super special because it does not allow motorboats. And what we did for that swim actually is had a tandem kayak, and we had one person paddling the kayak, and then the other person taking notes, observing, documenting, measuring the water temperature, etc. And it worked great. So that's one option. But in that case, you need to find people who can kayak. But for a lot of the swims that we do, you're going to want to hire a boat. So you got to find a boat. You might ask friends that live in the area. That might be a good place to start. Like, hey, do you know anyone with a boat who wants to help with like a super long distance swim? You can start calling boat rental companies, which I can talk a little bit more about my experience with that. Calling fishing and diving charters is a good option too. And finally, there are a couple of different types of apps that people have used. Martin Webster does this with Click and Boat in Europe. It's kind of like Airbnb for boats. So it's like people that own boats, but they want to sometimes like rent out their boat or come with you. You can specify if you want to have a boat and a captain or just a boat on the app. But yeah.
Yeah, and so one swim I was involved in organizing, I was 2015, my SBCSA, Santa Barbara Channel Swimming Association colleague, Dave Van Maurik, did a swim across Estero Bay. And Dave just went to the local marina in Morro Bay, which is, Morro Bay is a part of Estero Bay, and kind of asked around. And he eventually got recommended this particular captain. And how Dave described this, he talked to a number of different options, but what he really liked about this guy that he found was that the captain was curious about this swimming thing. Now, to most people, what we do is pretty nuts. Swimming in cold water for long distances. And so the big selling point for Dave with this boat captain was the captain was genuinely curious about what he was up to, and he was excited about it. And I think that's a huge thing. You don't want to just, if you can help it, you don't want to get somebody who is indifferent about marathon swimming or is frightened by it. If you can find someone who's really into it, I think that's a great solution. And so this pilot ended up being an active participant in the planning process and identifying the start and the finish location, and was just incredibly professional because he was personally engaged in this effort, and he found it to be impressive.
Yeah, that's awesome, because I think rule number one for any crew member, pilot, other crew observers is, does the person want to be there? Like if they want to be there, they're probably going to be a good crew member. If people are kind of like, okay, well, if you don't find anyone else, or if they're kind of like, yeah, not asking a whole lot of questions or not really curious about what you're doing or excited, then they're probably not going to be like the best fit for that type of activity. But yeah, once I figure out what boat it is, then I start putting feelers out for crew, because if I can't find enough people in the area I'm going to swim that want to do the swim with me, then I can't do it by myself. I mean, that's one of the special things about our sport, is that, I mean, you can go on adventures, self-supported swims alone, but you can't do this style of swimming by yourself. You need a crew, people to support you. So people kind of come first.
How do you decide how many crew members to have on a swim?
Well, so for me, I like as few as possible because I get overwhelmed when I'm like in a swim situation because I get really excited. And so if there's tons and tons of people, it makes me more excited. So I just need the minimum number of people. I tend to recommend this to other people too for a couple reasons. I think that first of all, boats are really small places, so I think even the most extroverted types of folks can sometimes get a little bit overcrowded or, if people are kind of step on each other's toes. And also, I've noticed that when everybody has a really specific role and they know exactly what they're doing, they focus really hard on that role. And so if there's like three people that are all supposed to be making your feeds, then it can get kind of complicated with that. And so it's nice if you've got the bare number of people. If you're doing a swim that's like going to be really long, like Evan mentioned that I've done a few like 24 plus hour swims, um, then you really need to have like two people for each role so that they can take breaks.
Well, personally, I am with you on wanting the minimum number of people on the boat. But I also have the longest swim I've ever done was 12 hours. That was my Lake Tahoe swim. I've never done anything in the 24 plus hour range, and I do think that when you get up into those durations, people do need to sleep, and you need to have people who are awake and paying attention, and looking out for you. So the one example that, and from my experience, I was on Sarah Thomas's Lake Champlain swim, which was 67 hours and 16 minutes, and uh, she had a massive crew. She had three support boats. There was a 60-foot sailboat that was kind of the main vessel. She had a pontoon boat, and then Phil White brought over Django from his place on Lake Memphremagog. So there are actually three support boats. Now, what the reason for this, it might seem like too much. Like, let me screen share Sarah's documentation from MSF. So let's go down to her crew here. So there's the sailboat. There's the pontoon boat. I forgot about the rib. Yeah, there was a rib that was part of the sailboat. So that actually makes four support boats. Here's the crew. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Like, it's massive crew. That looks like 14 people there. The reason for this is that in her case, she wanted to prepare for what happens when things go wrong. What if people get seasick? What if a boat breaks down? You want backups. You want to have second and third options for when things go wrong. And in fact, Phil's boat broke down. So now Phil's boat broke down within, I think, the first day of the swim. So at that point, the sailboat was towing the skiff, and we got by the rest of the swim with the three remaining support boats. A couple of these crew members got seasick. People had to sleep over the course of 3 days, but because there were so many people and so many boats, the swim was, and obviously due to Sarah's incredible endurance, the swim was successful. I think if she hadn't planned it that way, things could have gone wrong and she wouldn't have had a backup, and then maybe it wouldn't have been as successful even if she was capable of it. So I think that, not very many people are doing swims this long, but that could be, even though I personally prefer a very small crew, there are good reasons for doing it this way for these sorts of swims.
Okay, so one thing that I think is really interesting about doing documented swims versus through an organization is the difference that the observer, the role that person plays. And maybe you could say a little bit about that, Evan.
Yeah, so one of the most common questions that we get about organizing a swim for MSF ratification is, well, who should I pick as the observer? I think the answer is the observer can be anyone. I think the two main qualifications, to my mind, are detail orientation. Well, actually, let's say three qualifications. Detail orientation, so this becomes important with filling out the log and just making sure that things are documented frequently. Someone with a good attention to detail. They don't need to be a swimmer. I think the second would be familiarity with the rules of marathon swimming, so that they can credibly say the swim happened and it followed all the rules. And then the third being objectivity. I think we don't explicitly disallow family members from being observers, but I think it's not ideal. I think you want your observer to be able to say, if this person cheated, I would say so, and that they're not too kind of personally involved with the swimmer. But we don't explicitly disallow that. And I think, people often are dissatisfied with this advice, and they say, well, okay, is there a training course you can do? And that would be something that would be great to do sometime in the future, I think, to have some kind of certification. But I've seen hundreds of sets of documentation, many of them by first-time observers. It's totally doable for someone who's never observed a swim before to do a good job with a little preparation, familiarization with the rules, detail orientation. I think anyone can do this. And with a self-organized swim, it's the main role is for an observer is actually documenting the swim. They're not really representing an organization like the Channel Swimming Association. So they're not there as a representative. They're kind of like part of the support team, actually, and their role is documenting the swim. So, I mean, Jessica, how have you selected observers on your swims?
Yeah, so a great point. So detail orientation is really key, and so I pick people who I think can do a really good job just doing everything following the instructions. So on the Waldo swim, I had my partner Dan paddling. I didn't want Dan to be the observer because of what Evan said. Like maybe I mean, obviously wouldn't cheat anyway, but I don't want people to think like, oh, that's weird, like, so it ended up being a friend of mine who I climb with. I do rock climbing also, and rock climbing has kind of similar sorts of things as ultraswimming in a lot of ways. People are doing these things in far off adventure sort of places. And so I thought, here's somebody who would understand about the importance of this and why it needs to be properly done, why you can't bend the rules in different ways to make things more convenient. And I gave her all of the information from the MSF website and made sure that she read it, and we read the rules together before the swim started. And so this is kind of like, maybe this was a shorter swim. This was like a, 20-kilometer swim. So it wasn't like a really long swim, at least compared to some of the other ones that I've done. So
that sounds like a great approach. And I think it's always nice if you can find someone with observing experience, especially somebody who's been trained by one of the associations. But in reality, there aren't very many of those people, and they tend to be located in very specific locations. They're mostly in Southern California, or they're mostly in Dover. And so if you're doing a swim in Michigan or somewhere else, you might, or a ton of experienced observers in New York as well. But if you're doing a swim somewhere else that's not near one of these major local associations, it can be hard to find someone like that. So I think MSF, we want to empower people to take on this role, and not impose kind of some sort of unnecessary or irrelevant qualification on it, because I've seen plenty of examples of first-time observers doing a wonderful job. But I still think some care needs to go into who you're selecting for that role. Yeah, so I think next, we're still on planning the logistics of a swim. I think a number of swims I've been involved with, people find checklists to be very helpful, not only before the swim, but also bringing it on board the swim to remind their crew. One example, I'm going to go back to Sarah Thomas's Lake Champlain swim. So if you think about what's involved in this, I have 14 crew members coming in from all over the United States, converging on upstate New York area next to Lake Champlain. Pretty rural area. For a 3-day swim, she needed to make sure that she had everything that she needed on the boats, because once the swim starts, you're not going to be able to get something that you forgot, right? If you're out there on the lake. And so I want to screenshot this spreadsheet that Sarah put together before her swim. These are supplies that she wanted to make sure that she had on the boat or spread across the various boats before a 67-hour 3-day swim, basically. And so she's got each item, she's got a quantity if relevant, and then she's got the person who is responsible for bringing that thing. So Andrew Malinak was the boat captain. He was bringing the VHF radio, the Garmin chart plotter. And
this is awesome.
You can go down here and just like look at this checklist. Like,
yeah, that's awesome. That's a lot of stuff.
She was prepared. Everything you could possibly need.
This is such a good idea.
And even after all this, I think there are still, God, this is 8 years ago now, but I think at some point, like on the second day, they realized that she didn't have any of her caffeinated carb drink. Like she was supposed to have like 2 different types of carb drink, like a regular version and a caffeinated version, and then they realized on the second day that they were out of a caffeinated version. Because they had 3 boats operating there, one of them went back to shore at a marina.
I remember, so for people listening, you can read about this on the documented swims page for the swim, because I was not on the swim, and I remember reading about this exact thing. Yeah, her crew must have been just like the most awesome people ever. They're like, how can we get this for Sarah? Either that or I heard about it. Maybe she did a podcast about it, but I've definitely heard of this.
Well, this is the MSF documentation page, and it's, I think, one of the top 3 or 4 things I'm most proud of in the sport is like putting together this documentation. And it was just such an experience, but also just like a huge effort putting this all together, and a huge effort for everyone involved in the swim. That was something else. But anyway, enough on that. So that's an example of a very extensive checklist for pre-swim preparation. And Jessica, I think you've done some checklists for the people on your swim, like for during the swim, like reminders about things. You want to talk about that?
Right. Yeah. Good point. So on the swim, my checklist is super short. But all I think I'll have to look back and maybe figure out a way. I'm not sure if I can figure out a way to share it in the notes or not, but basically I just have a very short list of 3 or 4 things that everybody needs to do at the beginning of the swim. So it's like, note the time that my feet go in the water, like hours, minutes, and seconds, which, by the way, you can get from various apps, or you can just go to like World Clock or whatever on the internet. But minutes, hours, seconds of the official start time. Take a video or take a picture, or take a video and a picture. Make sure all the GPS. I like to have 3 different GPS devices during the swim. You can do GPS on your phone, get an app for that. You can have your GPS on your phone or Spot Tracker connected to Track RS, which is a lovely swim track app created by Evan. But it actually is like the best way to get the best data for your swim track. And I'm not just saying that because it's Evan. And then also use like a watch or something. Do not wear the watch. Do not wear a GPS watch. We will get to that later, but don't wear a GPS watch. But put the watch on your boat or on a crew member or whatever. So you have like 3 different GPSs running. And then I also have a checklist for things people should do at every feed. So every feed you should write down each line in the observer log, and then you should take a picture and you should check to make sure all the GPS devices are still running. And so I believe I actually added 2 columns on the observer log that just said photo and GPS devices running, and then had people just check those off each time, just as they were filling in like the wind speed and the water temperature and air temperature and everything else. That way we didn't have a situation where I get done with a 50-mile swim and like, oh, sorry, we don't have any GPS data. Or, oh, we took a lot of pictures at the beginning, but at the end we just got kind of tired and didn't take any pictures. This way it just kind of ensured that there were regular documentation throughout the entire swim.
So the last element of the plan is just kind of nailing down when it's going to happen, and this can vary from you identify a single day and the swim is going to happen on that day, or second option is setting a window of 2 days, 3 days, up to a week. This is what you'd be most familiar with in the English Channel. They have a window just because the weather over there is so unstable. So this can vary depending on the climate of the area, the nature of the body of water. Catalina is one of those swims where if you go out on a given day, you probably will get to swim. If you want to swim from the Farallon Islands into San Francisco, that's a swim that most days are not swimmable. So you have to either set a window, or you just have to kind of, if you're local, wait for a good day whenever it comes. And in cases like that, you have to have a support team and an observer who are flexible and are able to be there when that day comes.
Yeah, so this is actually a great segue into just the execution of these swims. So, from the swimmer standpoint, you at this point are just swimming, and hopefully you're just thinking about swimming, and you're not like me and you're like, hey, did you guys remember to do this? Did you remember to do that? It's best if you can just relax and focus on swimming. Meanwhile, your crew is documenting things, and there's a whole skill set for being a great crew member. And I really hope we can do a podcast on crewing and also observer training, kind of like, what do you need to know as a crew member and observer, so you can just give your crew that episode and say like, hey, can you guys listen to this? But for today, we're just focusing on what does your team need to be recording during the swim, so that you can let them know what they need to record, and also maybe just listen to this section of the podcast. But Evan, since you've developed this entire program, I think 2014 was that the first, or 2013 was that the first documented swim?
Yeah, it was 2014, although we subsequently got some documentation of 2013 that I managed to fit into the framework that was developed in 2014.
Oh, nice.
But just I'll tell the story of how this framework developed. And so back in 2014, a friend of mine, Craig Lenning, was hoping to do the swim from Farallon Islands to San Francisco. And I had heard that he was planning this swim. I reached out to him. I said, hey, if you need crew or whatever, I'm here. And he said, yeah, that'd be awesome. So I showed up at the boat, and the boat captain handed over a just kind of generic observer log sheet, and he said, "We don't have an observer, so I think you should do this." Because I actually went down to the harbor not knowing what I was going to be doing as a generic crew member, but he handed me the observer log and said, "You can be the observer." And I said, "Okay." And I had never been out to the Farallons before. They're a really special place, 30 miles offshore from San Francisco. And as we were boating out there, and I was aware of the significance of this swim in the history of marathon swimming. It had only been done twice before. Stuart Evans in 1967 swam from the Farallons to finished near kind of Bolinas Point on the Marin Headlands. And then that same year, Ted Erickson swam from the Farallons to the Golden Gate Bridge. And it had never been done since. Just those two swims in the 60s. And so Craig going out there, we're boating out there, and I was just aware of the significance of this event that was about to happen. And Craig had done a number of impressive swims, and I knew that he was capable of doing it. So I had a fairly good chance that this is going to be the first Farallon swim since the 60s. Wow. And I'm looking at this observer log, and I thought, this is so special. I think we need to do better than this.
Awesome.
It needs to be more than just a log. This is part of history. And we have so much more technology now. We have these phones that are video cameras. We have these GPS trackers. How can we get all of that involved in the documentation of this historic event? and I just kind of made it up on the spot. I filled out the observer log, but we had 2 GPS trackers going. One of the crew members, Jamie Patrick, had a fancy video camera, and he was taking pictures and video the whole time. And I got back, and the swim was successful. By the way, he finished on the shore of the Marin Headlands, and got back to my place and started putting all this together. And I can also look up the weather data from NOAA. We could get the water temperature and the air temperature from the official government source. And we have this GPS tracking data, and I can put this on a map, and then I can put it into my statistics program, and I can make a plot of the GPS showing the speed plot, and I can put all this together, and now we have this document.
That's so cool.
Of this amazing swim that Craig did. I think people really liked it, which is great. But then I thought, this wasn't that hard to do. It takes a little extra effort to make sure you're recording all the right things in real time. But everyone knows how to take a picture with their phone. The GPS tracker, once you turn it on, just leave it there, make sure it's still on. And so I thought, okay, this could be a template for how other people document these swims. And I'm gratified that now 11 years later we have over 400 of them. So I think
that's really amazing when you think of the scale of that.
But I think it's still maybe a little intimidating if you haven't done it before. And so we're just going to walk through here kind of a checklist, so to speak, of what you need to be documenting to be able to put together this documentation. And another thing I should note is that you don't have to format it like I know I did the formatting for Craig's Swim, and I put it up on the website. I actually do that for everyone. All you have to do is send in the data. You send in your GPS data, you send in the photos, you send in the observer log. I still do all the formatting, so you don't have to worry about that part. But anyway,
thanks, Evan. we really appreciate this, because you guys need to go to the website seriously and look at these pages. Are beautiful, like they really are. So you guys need to check it out.
People sometimes get frustrated that it takes a while to ratify the swims, and this is the main reason why. Is it takes at least a couple hours for each of these swims to put everything together.
That's like a huge amount of time when you multiply that by like 450.
It's a significant part of my life. Okay, so I'm going to walk through this, and this is actually for our benefit. Like, the more people are aware of how to do this, the easier it's going to be for us to go through this. People submit everything and check off all the boxes, then we don't have to come back and ask, you didn't submit your GPS track.
Yeah, because there is a significant amount. It's like gotta make sure you have all the things, and if you times that by X many swimmers, that constitutes some time too, and then it takes us a little bit longer to get the ratification completed. So
every set of documentation basically starts with some basic facts, and you need to make sure that you have these, that you record these basic facts, the exact time of day down to the second that the swim starts. So when do their feet first touch the water? When do they touch and release from a cliff face? Record that exact time of day and write it down, and don't forget it. Same thing with the finish. When do their feet clear the water onto dry land? We talked about route definition. That's another really important part of the documentation, that you have a solid, repeatable route definition. And who are who is your support team? All of their names and what each of them done, what each of their roles were. And then the next aspect is like, how did you do this swim? What were the standards and the rules that you were abiding by? Just maybe you can speak to why. What's the importance of this?
So again, I said this a little earlier, but I think it's important that if you're, you can always do an adventure swim or a training swim. Please do training swims and do them whatever way suits you. But if you want your swim to be an official swim, then the point of that is to tie what you're doing to what other people are doing. to do this as a community or group, as part of a sport. And so if you're going to do that, you have to do it the same way that other people in the sport are doing it. It's the same for every sport. You know, like if you're trying to set a record or get a good time or something in a pool, you don't, it's a 50-meter freestyle. You don't do that in like the hotel pool, like 2 laps in a hotel pool and be like, oh, wow, like I did the 50 freestyle in 15 seconds. You have to do it the same way as the other people. So in my mind, that's the reason for using standardized rules and why I think it's important that other people do that for official swims. But Evan, I'm curious what you have to say about that. Like, why not just, why, I think there's a freedom aspect of the sport. Like people are like, yeah, like just go swimming, you know, like, and you and I both love swimming. And I think most of the people we know in the sport love to swim. So why even have rules? I mean, like, why not just go swim?
Yeah.
What's the point?
Well, I think people should go swim. That's why we do it. We love being in the water. We love the act of swimming. It makes us feel good. We should always be doing that. At the same time, there's a more structured aspect of this. It's a sport. Ultraswimming, or solo long distance endurance swimming, is a sport, and sports have rules. And if you want to keep reliable records in a sport, you have to know that all the swims are using the same rules. It's like any other sport, you know, golf. Like you're comparing different golfers across different courses. Part of the ability to do that is knowing that everyone's using the same rules. Yeah, I think if you want to, there's something quite special about this sport, and that it's a pretty consistent tradition going back 150 years now of English Channel swimming. And the rules we're talking about are based in the tradition of English Channel swimming. You have a textile swimsuit that doesn't provide any warmth, and cap and goggles, and that's about it. And there's something very special about being part of that long tradition and being able to experience the same sort of athletic achievement in the same way as somebody did a long time ago.
Yeah. So it is important that you read the rules before you do the swim. And I say that not because it's, I mean, obviously it's important you read the rules, but sometimes people sort of like have an idea of the rules, like, oh yeah, like MSF, they don't do wetsuit swims, or they don't like, you know, they just do standard gear or whatever. But you got to read the rules so that you don't just like make a mistake that you just didn't think about ahead of time. Evan, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the most common mistakes that show up? I mean, these are all really well-intentioned people. Everyone's doing their best. It's just, it's easy to let things slip through the cracks sometimes. So maybe if we tell you guys like some of the common things that come up, it will help prevent any difficulties for those of you listening.
Yeah, I think the two most common that I've seen are GPS watches and toe floats. So I think toe floats in the last 15 years or so have become ubiquitous in races, in open water swimming races, especially in Europe. And so people are so used to swimming with toe floats that I think they just assume that that's how they swim when they do an official marathon swim. But no, it's a toe float is by definition, it is a flotation device. Those aren't allowed in unassisted swims. So I've seen swims submitted where the swimmer has a toe float on, and that's sorry. And that's true regardless of whether they use it as a flotation device. You know, people say, "Oh, I had a toe float, but I didn't rest on it." Okay, well, that's not really the point. It is a flotation device, and you know that's the basic definition of unassisted marathon swimming. Is nothing that improves your flotation, your buoyancy, your warmth, performance, or nothing that could potentially
So
impact that.
people kind of make the argument sometimes that like many of the things we do during our swims are assistive. Like people throw us feeds, you know, for instance, that's very helpful. But you just mentioned the categories of things that are helpful and considered assistive. And one of those 4 things is buoyancy. So those are things I think that came up with when the 4 of you wrote these rules, correct? that you identified these 4 categories as helpful things that are also considered. They put your swim into kind of a different type of category of swim. And we're not saying that those swims aren't also awesome in their own right, but it's a different type of swim.
Yeah, and I think there are helpful. There are a lot of helpful things, like a pilot boat, like having a powered pilot boat is helpful. I guess it is. It assists us in a way, but it's also, a boat is part of the standard equipment. So when we say what assistive equipment is, what's implied by that is assistive equipment outside of the standard of equipment of the sport. And the standard equipment of the sport includes things like an escort boat.
And a swim cap that, a
yeah,
swim cap does keep you a little warmer.
Sure,
yeah.
It does. Yeah.
So,
and,
I mean,
and GPS tracking, they didn't have that 150 years ago, and it certainly helps the boats go in a straighter line. But I think the point there is that it's not the boat GPS is not directly helping the swimmer swim faster.
I mean, so I think whatever equipment is on the boat is not on the swimmer, and so it's the swimmer has the standard gear on the swimmer. But I don't think that MSF or any other organization can venture into the territory of telling pilots and boat owners what they have on their boat or not, or what they're doing with their boats. But you mentioned GPS, and some people also, just like tow floats, very used to wearing GPS watches. Many people use them in their training. They sync them up to Strava. They get all kinds of data that they really enjoy. I think it might be worth just mentioning why do we not allow GPS watches? We allow GPSs on boats, but I have some ideas about this, but I'm kind of curious to hear what you want people to know about that.
Full disclosure, I wear a GPS watch on my training swims too. I like it. I like looking at the data afterwards. It's fun. But I think I'm also familiar with certain features on certain GPS watches that are undoubtedly assistive. And one of them is that, and this is the main reason that they're disallowed. This may not be a feature that many people use, but it is a feature, and that's that it can act as basically a metronome. It can provide feedback about, it can give you a little buzz on your wrist every certain distance. It can tell you you're just gone 50 meters, you're just gone 50 meters, or even quicker than that. And using that feature of a GPS watch is essentially like having a tempo trainer, like in a pool. They have the tempo trainer that you attach to your ear, and it's beeping to help keep your stroke rate up. And I know of examples where individuals are using this feature. The other aspect, and one that I think was discussed at the time, is that the technology available in a watch is going to increase exponentially over time. The technology that they can fit inside a watch attached to you. So if we're opening up the door to GPS watches, some GPS watches are able to buzz you like a metronome. Someday, who knows what they're going to be able to fit into a watch? And so I think it's easier to just say, if your watch it has the ability to tell the time of day, you can wear that. Anything beyond that, that's where we're drawing the line. And I think, again, I've heard swimmers say, oh, well, I wore a GPS watch, but I didn't actually use any assistive feature. I didn't even use the GPS. I just used it to tell the time of day. And well, no, like the tow float, even if you're not using the potentially assistive feature, it's still there. And it's not, I think, the observer's job to, look at your watch and figure out the exact features that it has and determine that you're not using whatever feature of the watch is assistive versus not. It's better to just say you can have a simple time-telling watch, and that's it. So that's why we put that rule like it is.
Yeah, and for anyone listening who doesn't think tempo trainers would somehow be helpful to speed, I just have to say I use a tempo trainer in training, and when that thing is on, I do my usual, sort of course in my lake and get my time I'll do like a kind of an interval set. Oh my gosh, I'm so much faster when my tempo trainer's going. I love it. It's so fun, but it definitely helps you get your turnover going, and it helps you not space out. That was kind of my main reason of what I was going to say. absolutely is the metronome feature.
No, I think specifying the rules that you're using is kind of the first part of describing how you did the swim. And then the basic unit of documentation that the observer puts together is the log. Now, MSF has a standard log, but there are other logs that basically do the same thing. Now, Jess, you've looked through a couple hundred of these at least through MSF. What do you think makes an effective log versus a less effective one? What's a high quality log? What's the feature?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's two things. One, what is high quality for you as a person reviewing the swim? So you're looking through the log, you want to just make sure that everything makes sense. And so if everything's clearly written on the log, you can handwrite the log. That's totally fine, but just make sure it's legible so that somebody reading it on their computer screen is going to be able to see what it says. Also, I like to see every line filled in. It's not so good if they wrote the water temperature at the start of the swim and then they didn't write it again until like 4 hours into the swim or something. Because to me, if I'm reviewing it, don't worry, I'm not going to be like, oh, guess it didn't happen, you know. But it's just not as great of a quality of documentation because it shows that maybe the documenter wasn't really dialed into it. And I can see that Evan is sharing his screen for people watching on YouTube. But Evan, do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, so we designed this log with an eye for what information do we want recorded preferably half an hour, minimum hourly. And I think we should consider each of these columns to be non-optional. You should be recording this. Sometimes if it's a very consistent water temperature, I'll skip. I'll record the temperature every other line or something like that. But I think the big thing is the notes column here, which takes up half the page. It takes up half the page for a reason, is because we would like to read notes here, not just, if the person feeds 50 milliliters of Gatorade every half an hour, that's not really that informative. You can describe your nutrition as part of the rest of the documentation. But I think it's interesting to write in this notes column, look, what interesting happened over the last half an hour? Were you visited by a dolphin? Did a crew member get seasick? Just like what's going on the swim? I think it helps us when we're reading it feel like we're a part of what's happening if you include kind of more detail in this notes column.
Yeah, and that kind of gets to my second thing, which is like, think of this as like you're trying to get your swim ratified so it can be official and be in the long swims database. But the other thing you're trying to do is share with other swimmers that are going to look at your documentation page. We just had a few swimmers who did some routes in Flathead Lake, and one swimmer mentioned that she did the length. Tess Andres, she read the other logs from the other swimmers who had done the length. And she said that was really helpful to her. And she said that her boat pilot, who was piloting a pontoon boat, who had never piloted a swim before, found it really helpful to read through those. So if your observer can include things in the notes that might be interesting or useful to somebody else who might want to do the swim, like, oh, looks like we're caught in a current at such and such point. That might be good to know for the next person. Not that the currents are always going to be the same every time, but water temperature dropped 2 degrees toward, the inlet or whatever. Like it's like, oh, okay, well, now we know that we might anticipate those types of things. So those are really helpful to put in there.
So the next one is GPS tracking, and a lot of people get tripped up on this, unfortunately, especially if they haven't done it before. And it's really unfortunate because a complete GPS track is a non-negotiable requirement of ratification. So if you don't have that, then I'm sorry. And so we try to provide as much information ahead of time about but the biggest recommendation I have on this is always use at least one backup device.
Two backups.
Preferably two.
Yeah.
Two. So I have a service, Track RS, that some people sometimes they are under the misapprehension that this suffices for their GPS tracking. And what happens, especially if they're using a phone tracker, sometimes it fails. And really, Track RS is for entertainment purposes. It's for live tracking. It's so your friends and family can follow. But really, you should be making sure that you have other trackers going. In particular, like having a Garmin watch on the boat that is tracking you. Now that's you're not wearing it, but it's on the boat, and they're pretty reliable. But simply logging a track, it's not transmitting it live, but it serves as documentation. You can submit the GPX. That's a file format. GPX. That's a raw data type that I can then create a map from and a speed plot. So I think always use a backup and always test it ahead of time. Make sure you know how to use the device. So at least several days before your swim, give it a test and make sure you know how to turn it on, turn it off. Make sure your crew knows how to do it, and make sure that it's working the way you want it to. Because if it fails on the swim and you haven't tested it before, it's hard to come back from that. So occasionally get people submitting screenshots of GPS maps, and so it's really important that we need the raw data, and that's typically in GPX format. A screenshot is not acceptable, because only with the raw data can I then construct a map and construct a speed plot. If I'm just getting an image, we can't make a speed plot from that and kind of analyze it on a deeper level other than just the map. The last part that's kind of the most colorful part of the documentation, literally, is the photos and the video. And this is something that traditionally you might have an observer log, but then your friends post the photos on Facebook. It hasn't traditionally, until we developed this, been part of the official documentation. And so for the swims that you've looked at, what do you like to see in terms of the selection of photos and video?
So I really, really like seeing a video or photo of the start and the finish.
Yeah.
And we don't always get those, but it is part of the required documentation. So please do send a video or photo. That's why I have it on my little checklist for crew. Like, it's so exciting at the start and so exciting at the finish that everybody kind of gets wrapped up in the moment. But if you just remind your crew, like, hey, these are the things we really need from you at the start. And one of them is a photo, preferably a video, but photo's fine too, of the start. And then the other thing I really like to see is photos or videos of like significant waypoints. So like, oh, we just swum under such and such bridge, and they have a video of you swimming under that bridge, and that video is timestamped for 9:08 a.m. and it says on the observer light 9:08 a.m. Swimmer swam under the bridge. So you're like, wow, it all fits together. And then also, just in terms of frequency, I think it's really good to have a photo or video at least every hour. And it's nice if this is like a sort of, you get extra credit if you do it this way, but if you can just send one for like every hour and, every significant waypoint, I should say, and every significant waypoint, and then label them really nicely so they're like the file names are like the times, then that just makes everything easier for us when we're going through to kind of see like, oh, here she is swimming under the bridge at 9:08 a.m. It can get a bit much if people send like 500 photos or something like that, because then it's like, ooh, it's a lot to go through and make sense of. So that's extra credit if you can figure out how to do that.
Yeah, I think we definitely don't, need a dozen shots of the swimmer's arm against the water without any reference point to land or anything. Like, one of those is fine. If the conditions are changing a lot, maybe showing the different conditions. The big reason, by the way, that we like having a video and not just photos, like a clear close-up video showing the swimmer's stroke, is because looking at how the person swims is really helpful in kind of evaluating what they're claiming. You look at what's the route they did and what is the time it took them to do the route, and then looking at how they swim. That should fit together. If we can tell if someone's like a fast swimmer, and then if that fits with a fast time on the route, then it all makes sense. But if we see someone who is clearly a very slow swimmer, and then they're claiming that they set a record on some route, then that's worth looking into a little bit more. And so that's why it's good. The video, even a 15-second video, can tell us a lot about about a swimmer. And
Yeah, I
hope that,
also think like if you're trying to claim a record or you're doing a really long swim, you gotta send us more stuff, not like 500 photos, but like just please, make sure that you're not just sending in like a handful of photos and like a 30-second video, because if you're going for like a really wild, amazing thing, then you want to submit a lot of evidence. If you're doing like a swim like my Waldo swim that's just 20 kilometers or 12 miles or whatever, not that that's, I shouldn't say just, because that I can remember not so long ago when I was like, oh my God, 12 miles without stopping. That's crazy. Who would do that? But that's not a record setting swim. It's just a really cool route and everybody should do it. But in that case, maybe a smaller number of photos and maybe just one 30-second video just showing the stroke and everything is just completely fine. So it kind of depends a little bit.
yeah. I mean, not every swim is going to be super visually interesting, especially cross-channel swims where most of it is just out in the middle of the ocean somewhere.
Yeah.
But I think taking advantage of any kind of interesting visual features as excuses to take photos is always good.
And the sunset and the sunrise. You got
Yeah.
to send
Oh,
one of
yeah.
those. So just for our viewing pleasure.
Okay. And with that, we have now covered elements of dreaming, planning, and executing a self-organized marathon swim. If you are interested in this subject and interested in developing your own swim, we recommend looking at the 400 plus ratified swims available on the MSF website for good examples. And I think in closing, I want to thank everyone who has submitted documented swims over the last 11 years. Thank you for believing in the project. Thank you for putting the effort into compiling the documentation and submitting it and participating in the sport and preserving the history of your swim for everyone else to kind of be inspired by. So we're going to keep doing what we do, and we hope that you will too.
I second that. Thank you guys so much. And thank you for listening today. We're going to have more podcasts coming up, more episodes coming. And in the meantime, you can find us on marathonswimmers.org is the website. Also, we're on Facebook at Marathon Swimmers Federation and Instagram, Ultraswimming. And please feel free to reach out and let us know what you thought about the podcast. Thanks again, and see you next time.
Thanks.